I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast.
So today is a Katina article. What did you pick for us today?
It is. So today we're going to be talking about the power of humility in teams, so being humble, and how that might help cut down on bullying in teams. So unfortunately, bullying is an issue that affects many people at work, and creating a team environment that discourages bullying can be a good way to solve that problem. And new research shows that humility might be a key for doing that. So that's what we're going to be talking about.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense to some extent. Like, just when you hear about it, it's like, oh, I want to put those two together, but wait, maybe I would. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear about it a little bit more. I do think that the bullying as a topic is important. I know we've talked about it before, so I'm glad we're continuing that conversation.
Yeah, yes. And right now with some collaborators, I'm doing a meta-analysis on humility, leader humility in particular. And we're finding some interesting effects across different demographics. Like, we're finding that age matters in terms of how much people value humility, and it matters differently across cultures. So humility is actually kind of an interesting construct.
Cross cultures makes a lot of sense. I feel like when like in my last job, we were doing some research with humility as well, and the cross cultural piece was very important. So I'm not surprised that's coming out. I'll be curious to hear about that paper when it's ready. I think that'll be a good one to bring.
But for today, we have this paper.
Yes. And before you tell us about it, how about let's chat a little about your day. Weekend? How's everything going?
Yeah. So our weekend was actually really nice. So I think I might have been mentioning this last time around, but we basically have like travel like every weekend from now until like forever. And so this past weekend
forever.
Was, and so this past weekend was like the last weekend for a long time that we're just like here. So we just decided to kind of like chill. So we were like,
nice.
Yeah. So on Friday, I think we ordered food and watched Great British Bake Off, which I find such a delightful show. Like, I truly just like find that show so delightful. And so we watched that. And then on Saturday, we went to a brewery. And then we went out to dinner. And then on Sunday, we went to brunch with some friends. And I took a long nap, which was very nice. So I feel like it was just like a good, like, relaxing weekend.
That sounds lovely. And I love the nap. Naps are always good.
Yes, I know. Well, I feel like because we have been running around a little bit, sometimes you like don't notice that you're tired. And then all of a sudden it like hits you that you're tired and you're just like, what the heck? And then you take a nap and you feel delightful.
You're like, oh, that's all I needed was a little bit more sleep.
Exactly. So so that was my weekend. Nothing too exciting, but definitely restful. How was your weekend?
My weekend was good. We're recording this on Monday, and it's still the weekend for me because we had Indigenous Peoples / Columbus Day off from work.
Yes.
So I have been enjoying the day. But the weekend, let's see. So, well, today we did take the kittens to the vet for the first time. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
They were good sports for sure. But after Ray got examined, she was like, the carrier was still like on the little table. And they're so tiny, right? So they're just sitting there on the table, both of them and the carrier. And there's like still tons of room. And so the vet started with Ray and like did the little like, feeling their joints and whatever they do.
Yeah.
And then as soon as she was done, Ray was like, nope. I went straight back into the carrier. I was like, I'm ready to go. That was not fun.
Goodbye.
It was really cute. Kona was a little bit more
cute.
chill. She was like, oh, this is happening, but I guess whatever. Like, she didn't seem as she didn't go straight back to the carrier afterwards, but Ray was just done. So that was funny. Yeah, it was funny. It was cute. They're very healthy. So we're happy about that.
Good. That's exciting.
Yeah, and then on Saturday we had my parents over. They were like traveling a little bit the past couple weeks, so they haven't seen the little babies since they've grown a bit. So they came over here, made dinner, watched the Dodger Giants playoff game.
Nice.
And then on Sunday we actually celebrated our friend's engagement. So you know them, Jimmy and Matt.
Yay.
They're the friends that we stayed at their house in Palm Springs.
Yay.
And yeah, it was so fun. We went to this Greek restaurant called Taverna Tony's in Malibu, which is like it's been there forever, like 40, 50 years or something really, really long. And it's just this great Greek spot, and Jimmy's Greek. And so he's never been. He's heard it's the best Greek place in LA and really wanted to try it out. So we took them there, and he did approve of it, so that was nice. I've been there a million times, so I was like, I like this place, but I don't know if it's actually authentically Greek. I can't vote on that, but he liked it. And then there's like a little tasting room for like a winery nearby, and so we walked over there and did some wine tasting. So it was a really nice Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun, and I'm so happy for them. That must have been a blast, and also just so exciting to celebrate.
I know, it was so fun. We're so excited for them. So
yay.
It was nice. It was nice to get to celebrate them. It was kind of funny because we were realizing that we met Matt the weekend after we got engaged. Like Dan and I got engaged. So it was like we got engaged, and the following weekend we met Matt for the first time. Like Jimmy brought Matt over, and then we celebrated our engagement. So it's kind of felt like this weird like coming full circle thing. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
That is so exciting. That
so
makes me happy.
Good. It was a good weekend.
Well, it sounds like we both had restful, nice weekends where we like enjoyed some friends. Yeah, like the friends that we saw, we haven't seen. We were like, wait, when was the last time we saw you? And it was literally March 2020.
Oh,
was
man.
The last time that we saw them. And
wow.
They have 2 little kids, a 2nd grader and a 4-year-old. And so the last time we saw them, they were literally, the last time we saw them was December 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Like the last time we saw them, they were in like kindergarten and like 2.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So that's like a huge difference.
Yeah, totally.
Like they were like little people, and I was like, what is happening? So that was kind of crazy, but it is nice to like spend some time and catch up and have just like a chill, fun weekend. So
yeah,
I was happy about that.
I was too. So I'm glad we both had that.
Yay.
And there was no bullying involved.
No, there was not. I didn't get bullied by one person.
Me neither. So big win. But if there is bullying in your workplace, what should we think about?
Well, that was actually a very good transition because I did not get bullied. It was. I think that was one of our, sadly, I think that's one of our better work. So yes. So the article that I'm talking about today is called How Do Humble People Mitigate Group Incivility? An examination of the social oil hypothesis of collective humility, which I will tell you what that is. And it was published this year, 2021, in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology. And it's by Chiu, Marron, and Tuckey.
Social oil? Is that what you said?
Yes, I did. I said social oil.
Never heard of that. So I'll be curious to learn more.
Yeah, I had actually never heard of it either. And it's a pretty simple concept. So I don't think it'll take too long to describe. It's like kind of like a fancy sounding name. But like the thing I don't like about it is like snake oil like is meant to be like very like fake. I don't know. Like I associate like the oil of something as being like, oh, that's tricky. But this is not tricky. This is just like fine.
Straight up good. Okay.
Straight up good. So I'll tell you a little bit about what they were interested in. So the first part of this is about humility. So we'll talk a little bit about what's humility and then I'll kind of back into why it might be important for decreasing incivility, which is another word in the literature for bullying. So humility is the tendency to be able to admit your own weaknesses, to appreciate other people's strengths, and to learn from other people. So it sort of has these like 3 parts. And so just to get into the parts a little bit more, the first part is around being able to recognize that you don't know everything, that you have some areas where you're not an expert, and that you can accept and recognize that sometimes you make mistakes, and you can accept and recognize that there are areas where you're not as strong in. So that's the first kind of component of humility, is like, hey, these are things that I'm not good at, and that's fine. I accept that. And I, recognize that I'll sometimes make missteps, and that's okay. And I'm fine with letting people know when that happens.
Yeah. And I think it's an important one because, I mean, there's just so many important things that are linked to that piece of humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't recognize you have weaknesses, then you can't ever improve. If you don't admit to your mistakes, then you can't create a learning culture wherever you are and really grow from mistakes and learn from those mistakes. There's a lot of really positive things associated with being able to like understand where you might not be so strong, where you could use other people's support or help, in that sense. And then also like be able to learn from those areas versus being like, I'm the best all the time and ignoring your mistakes. And then you just never actually are better at anything.
Yeah, exactly. And actually it's super linked to the second component, which is like, if I know that I have these weaknesses, then my way of making up for those things is to say like, not only do I accept that I have some faults, but I also recognize that other people have strengths where I have faults. Mm-hmm. And it probably behooves me to try to learn from those folks and surround myself with people that can help me get better at those things, or just, I know I'm not going to get better at them. So maybe it's not something I can get better at, or it's just something I'm not going to be able to improve all the way at. So I try to learn of what others do, or go to other people for advice or guidance, or build a team that helps so that we all balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. So it's also being able to recognize like, oh, and other people are sometimes good at the things that I'm not good at. And that's also positive because that helps me to grow and it helps the team to be better. And the last part is not just that you recognize that you can learn from people, but you also show appreciation for other people's strengths. So people who are humble don't just say like, hey, show me how you do X, Y, Z because I'm not good at that. They also say like, hey, you're particularly good at this. That's awesome. Like, this is what's great about having you on the team. This is what I really appreciate about you. So they're very good at showing their appreciation for other people and verbally showing recognition for other people's strengths.
Do you know who I feel fits this definition like so well?
Who?
David, our friend David.
You're right.
Right? Like he's got a lot of really incredible strengths, but he's definitely aware of where he doesn't have strengths. He really seeks other people to fill in those gaps for him and like, learn from other people and bring them on board. And then he's incredibly appreciative of other people's strengths. And he just, I feel like he completely embodies this definition.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I agree.
I'll have to tell him.
Yeah, tell him that we talked about humility and that we thought of him and that we think he's awesome. Because that is very true. That's a good call. Yeah, and I think part of it is also that he is like always talking about like, this is where I think I am really good. This is where this other person is really good. And I've been learning so much from them. Like, you're right. He does like say a lot of stuff like that. And we know that humble people tend to be better leaders, and they also tend to be perceived as more effective by other people. So when you demonstrate these things, even though it sounds like, oh, I'm showing my weakness, I'm showing that I don't know stuff, etc., which traditionally people would think of as being associated with like, oh, well, that's not what like a good, strong like leader would do. People actually appreciate this, and people who are considered outstanding leaders tend to do this more than people who don't. So humility has a lot of positives. people tend to view humble people as being more empathetic. And because of this, getting to the social oil, so because humble people tend to be more empathetic towards others and viewed as just like more considerate, they can basically buffer the impact of negative interpersonal relationships. And they say that it's the social oil hypothesis because, like, oil prevents an engine from overheating.
What?
Which I don't know. Humble people can prevent a team from like boiling over when times are stressful. So if you are working on something where you have to work well together interpersonally, and you know you're under a time crunch, things are stressful, having people around who are not arrogant and who want to learn from other people and show appreciation for other people can help to like grease the wheels of social processes so that they turn more smoothly even under times of duress. So that is the social oil hypothesis.
Well, I mean, I think it's a valid hypothesis.
Yes.
But I absolutely hate the name. So I think whoever made up that name, sorry to say, you should be humble and know that you're not good at making names for these things and maybe learn from someone else because that is not a good name. And like comparing it to a car, like I don't think that should be in the name of a hypothesis. Whatever.
I agree with you.
I'm done. I'm off that soapbox. But yeah, wow.
I am also on board with the idea. And actually, these authors did not come up with it. Apparently, it was someone named McElroy. So I'm sorry, McElroy, if you're listening. We're not into the social oil hypothesis, but we do agree with you that humility might help grease the wheels of social relationships. And so this is kind of how they make the link into incivility. So incivility is a very specific form of what might be considered bullying behavior. And we don't use the word incivility that much in organizations. So bullying is a more common term if you're going to like be talking about this with people at work. But basically, incivility is rude or discourteous behavior that's low intensity. And the issue of why incivility is so like problematic in organizations is because it's often ambiguous in terms of the intent. And it's like these low grade violations of respectful behavior. So it's hard to put your finger on like whether the person meant to be disrespectful or whether they're actually trying to be rude to you or whether it's just like in your head, or if you're going to report it, like what specifically are you going to report? Because nothing about it is exactly a clear violation. So it actually ends up being a really problematic form of bullying because it's very confusing to the target and it's very difficult to report and it's very difficult to pin down. So, while overt behaviors are very damaging, something that's positive about overt behaviors is that you know that you're being bullied and it's very easy to say this person's out of line and I need to report this. Whereas with incivility, these are more subtle behaviors. And so what they say in the paper is these uncivil behaviors can really like stop up the gears of a team as they're trying to work together because it creates this like low level ambient hostile culture that keeps the team from working together well. And the idea is that when you have more people who are humble, showing appreciation for people, creating a team environment where people are trying to actually like learn from each other and like instead of seeing their weaknesses as threats, they're seeing it as an opportunity to like gain more knowledge from other folks. So instead of being like in competition and threatened by each other and not admitting when people could learn and not showing appreciation for each other, when you have more humble people in a group, it like adds oil to the gears that might be getting stopped up by this uncivil behavior and creates a culture where actually incivility has a hard time taking hold.
And so because of that, I feel like this incivility can be pretty damaging psychologically because you just make up your stories, right? And maybe you're not good enough, what have you, versus somebody else is the problem here. So that kind of covert bullying can be really, really problematic.
Yeah, and the article actually talks a lot about the impact that incivility can have on people's well-being. And so we know that incivility has outcomes that are problematic for people. And so, it could be something like you're not getting invited to a social event, or that other people are getting important work-related information passed along to them, but you're not getting that information. And so they use those as kind of examples of like, why did this person ignore me? Why did I not get the information that I need, but these other people got the information that they need? And so, like you're saying, you could have one narrative that's like, people are leaving me out on purpose, but another one could be like, well, maybe they just didn't remember to invite me, or maybe it was just an oversight. And so because you can come up with these different outcomes, people are likely to ruminate over them for a longer period of time. And also it impacts performance, satisfaction, engagement, but also it gives people a lot of anxiety. It causes stress. It can make people want to leave their job. It can create more like relational tensions. And it can also relate to psychological and behavioral issues at work. So there's a lot going on that's related to the experience of incivility. And in this article, they are looking at group level incivility. So when your group has a high reported mean, so like everybody agrees that this is an uncivil team. And when that happens, that can have bad consequences for the team overall, as they like jointly experience what sometimes can be an individual level experience otherwise, but they're looking at it as aggregated to the team level.
That's really interesting. And actually, as you're talking about that, I was like thinking of examples of teams that I've seen that probably would be considered high incivility teams, unfortunately. And it is a very interesting environment to be working in. So I'm curious to know like what they found and how we can bring in humility to help alleviate some of that.
Yeah. So what they found is pretty straightforward and simple. So they did a 2-wave survey that got some data from the employees and some data from their supervisors. And basically what they did was at time 1, they got data from the employees themselves. And I should mention that this was team level data. And so they got this from 50 different stores, 55 different teams across those stores. And so in each of those teams, they got each team member to report how humble they were in the first survey. And then 2 weeks later, they got a second survey and they reported their incivility based on their interaction with their colleagues. And they also asked leaders to evaluate. So the team leaders had to evaluate the collective humility that they thought existed in the team. So basically, they were looking at, does individual level humility predict the emergence of this like collective humility norm on the team? And then does the emergence of this collective humility norm predict lower ratings of employees of how much incivility is in their team on average? So that's the method that they followed. And what they found was that in these teams, the higher the average humility was, so they took all the members of the teams, individual rated, like to what extent do you demonstrate humility? The average level of humility on the team impacted positively the extent to which the leader of the team said, yes, this team actually has a norm for being humble, which makes sense. So the more individuals on the team are humble, the more the team is recognizably humble as a characteristic. And then the more the team is humble as a characteristic, the lower the averages that group members rate that they experience incivility overall in the team. So you end up with a lower kind of group rated incivility. So what they thought would happen actually worked, that the more humble people you have, the more likely it is that the team is viewed as humble, and the more humble the team is, the less likely it is that the team has high average levels of incivility.
Interesting. And this, I think, is actually really important to kind of go back to the definition of humility, because I feel like when we think about humility the way we talk about it, kind of like on the street, I don't know, if you will.
Yeah.
But in that context, I think it'd be like, well, somebody's saying that they're humble. Well, no, they're saying that they admit their mistakes, they recognize their weaknesses, they appreciate other people's weakness or strengths, and know where other people might compliment them, things like that. So that is something you could answer and not and still be humble, right? I think that's where
Yeah.
that definition is kind of important, because as you were talking about it, I was like, ooh, if someone just listened to that clip, it would sound like
Yeah, right.
I'm
Maybe they're
just
not
running around
humble.
saying I'm humble, but
Right.
in the way that humility is defined in the research literature, you could easily rate yourself on that and admit, if you know you have weaknesses, things like that, etc. So I wanted just to call that out really quick, but then also I think a lot of this makes a lot of sense and it's interesting, right? It's like, so if I'm humble, if I'm high on humility, and my team is all high in humility, then my leader recognizes that the team has got this level of humility. And if we are appreciative of each other's strengths, then it makes sense that we would be treating each other better. We wouldn't have this incivility going on within the team.
Right. Yep. And it is helpful, and that's a good call out, I think, to know what the items were. So they were things like, for the humility, they were things like, I actively seek feedback, even if it's critical. I show and appreciate, or I show appreciation for the unique contributions of others, and I'm open to others' ideas. And that predicted whether or not the leader answered questions like, members of this team seek feedback, members of this team show appreciation, members of this team are open to each other's ideas. So while it doesn't seem like, rocket science to say, well, of course, if individual people say that they're doing this, then the leader might say the team does this in general. It is good to know that the more humble people you hire, the more likely it is that the team starts to demonstrate these characteristics as a group, right? So like a norm starts to develop, the more people you have in the team that are like this. And then the more that norm has developed, the less likely it is that people are going to say that they experience incivility. And for those questions, it were things like, my colleagues addressed me in unprofessional terms, my colleagues paid little attention to my statements, my colleagues showed little interest in my opinion. So the less likely it is that they'll say that they experience this incivility.
And I think the other important thing to note about the supervisor piece is now we're also confirming the supervisor is seeing this humility. So it's not like a bunch of people are saying, yeah, we are super high in humility, and the supervisor's like, actually, no one seeks feedback. Like, that would be a problem.
Right.
So the fact that they're aligned kind of helps drive this narrative in the story. And I like what you're saying, like creating this norm in your team to behave a certain way and to appreciate each other's support, ask for feedback, appreciate people's strengths and what they're contributing, can lead to a place where you're not being ignored, your ideas are being heard, etc. So I think it's a really interesting story, and I like what you said about hiring people that are high in humility. But I think another piece that you mentioned about the creating a norm is critical. So like if you're on a team that's not currently exhibiting these behaviors, you can work on developing a norm, right? So I always think about teams and, when you come together as a team, can you set ground rules? Can you and if you're in a situation you've been working with the team for a long time, is there an opportunity to reset? A lot of people that listen to the show probably have heard of like Tuckman's team development stages, right? Like people have heard of like forming, storming, norming, performing, from how teams develop. And the thing is that that's not always linear, right? Like you might go back stages. People might, what's it called? Like if a new person comes into the team or somebody leaves a team, like you go through these stages again. So I think it's really important. Like if you don't know about Tuckman's stages, I would encourage people to go Google it. But basically it's all about how like teams create norms, right? They come together, they figure out how they're going to work together, they create those norms, and then they start doing their jobs and performing at a high level, right? Those are like basically the stages. And if you're able to come in and be like, all right, like maybe some of the people on the team are not super high in humility, like naturally, or they haven't been, generally speaking, there might be an opportunity when you're kind of forming and storming as a team, thinking about how we can drive those norms. Like, what are the things that we can do? Like, how can we address mistakes? Maybe there's a norm that if there's a mistake, everyone's going to own up to their mistakes, and we're going to take that and learn from it. And we're going to practice that behavior. And the people that maybe are naturally higher in that can be the examples of showing how that happens and create that norm. And if everyone agrees on the team that they want to create these norms, then you can get into a better place, right? It doesn't have to be something that you are just, I am naturally more likely to admit my mistakes, or in my experience, that's always what I've done. Maybe this can be a time that you can create those norms within your team. And so I think it's being really planful and thoughtful as to how you develop as a team that can really help. And if you need to reset as a team, that's going to be a little bit harder, but take that time to like sit down and have a conversation. What do we want the ground rules to be for our team? How do we want to work together? How do we create an environment where we are showing this humility so that we are working cohesively in an effective way and we don't have this incivility brewing under the surface?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And one other thing that we can take away from the article is that they did find that bad apples can ruin the bunch. So the more you have sort of individuals in the group who are not humble, so if they had some people in the group who were low on humility, or if they had some people who were high on demonstrating incivility to other people, that weakened these relationships. So it is important that if you have someone on the team who is really egotistical, not demonstrating these behaviors, or someone who is displaying uncivil behavior, even though the rest of the team may not be following suit, that you address that and take care of it, because that actually can weaken humility's impact on this group norm emerging, and it also weakens the impact of the group norm of humility on decreasing incivility. So if you have folks in your team that are more egotistical or do show uncivil behavior, even if the norm is generally not that way, you shouldn't just say like, oh, I'm going to overlook that because basically we're doing a good job. There's just this one or two people that aren't so great. That actually has an impact on all of these relationships and weakens the ability for the other folks' humility to make up for it, basically. So it's definitely worth calling out.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So it's like, I'm just thinking through what I had just said about like, how do you set those norms? I think sometimes we get into bad habits and then a team, might not be doing the right thing because we've gotten into these bad habits and created norms that are bad, right? So like we can create norms where uncivil behavior is okay for some reason, and therefore we move on and we continue to behave that way. And that's when the reset helps. But to your point, if there is somebody that is just rude, period, right? And no matter what you do, even if the norms have been okay and you're setting those ground rules, they ignore the ground rules, they're doing whatever, that is a totally different story. And it makes a lot of sense that would then just kind of poison everyone else. And so then people probably all start kind of disconnecting from that positivity that humility can bring, and they're starting to maybe behave that same way or just kind of not engaging in the same ways that humility would encourage people to engage. So how can we remove that person from the situation, or how can we help that person along the journey to humility, right? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just have to remove the person from the situation, and that's unfortunate, but it happens. So I think that's a really good call out. That bad apple piece is really interesting that they found that, and I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if the person is like a really high performer. They're hurting your team's culture by not saying something. So I feel like sometimes people let people get away with things if they are like, oh, well, their numbers are really good, so the fact that they have a big ego or the fact that they sometimes treat people poorly is no big deal. But it actually could be ruining the social oil that actually ends up becoming a problem as the team is trying to work together, that that could be the thing that stops things up. So making sure that you're protecting against that is very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great call because I've seen this so many times in a lot of different teams across clients, across companies that I've worked for, where there's just this unwillingness to address it because somebody is good at their job. But if they're good at their job and everyone else around them isn't as good as they could be because of their behavior, is that really worth it? Because now if you're in a team of, let's say, 6 people, one person's performing really well, the other 5 are not performing as well because they're being impacted by this person, then you probably would do better as a business to have the other 5 people performing at their top and not have that person there.
Right.
So even just from a business perspective, it makes sense because the people that are being treated uncivilly, that are not feeling safe in their environment because of that, they're not going to be doing their jobs as well. And that person's going to keep looking like a bigger rock star because everyone else around them is not going to be doing as well. That person's gone. Those people are going to boost up and suddenly your whole team is performing effectively and you've got a whole new culture and people are happier. They're more likely to stay. All the things we always talk about. So yeah, we need to not entertain the bad apples.
Totally agree. And really glad that we're able to discuss the importance of humility because I feel like a lot of organizations forget the importance of having a little bit of a dose of understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And we see a lot of egotistical people in organizations, and to know that it's actually not helping is, I think, an important thing to know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's part of the culture to think that humility in business maybe isn't a good thing, but it's nice to see articles and research to show actually you're wrong. And if we go back to our dear friend David that we mentioned earlier, he's very successful and he is definitely high in humility. So perfect anecdotal example of the fact that you being high on humility is not going to somehow detract from your success either. So I think it's a good takeaway for obviously leaders and managers to think about how their teams are being structured and making sure that the proper norms are being set and addressing bad apples. But it's also important for you as an individual employee to think about how you can grow in your humility. How can you be more aware of where your weaknesses might be and really understand other people's strengths and appreciate those strengths? How can you do that better so that you can continue to succeed as well?
Yeah, I completely agree. I love that takeaway, and I appreciate you listening to the importance of humility for cutting down bullying.
And thank you so much for sharing this article. Always wonderful and really interesting. And I can't wait for our listeners to hear it and see what they can do with this. And as always, if you have questions, comments, feedback, you can always send us a note at contact@workerbeing.com. You can also find us on our website, workerbeing.com, or on social media at workerbeing on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but we do have a YouTube channel that is fully live and up there. And we've got 2 videos, one coming out actually probably the day after this podcast launches. So more videos coming out every 2 weeks where we talk about the same types of topics, just in smaller tidbit form. So go check that out as well. And thanks for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.